Good. We'd now like to move on to our next session. Let's put our hands together as I welcome on stage Dr. Nigel Oseland, Strategist, Workplace Unlimited, who will be speaking on why we need to design for the years. Let's put our hands together as he steps on stage.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your wonderful city. And I have to say, I was slightly nervous about coming to India to talk about noise. You know, it's well documented, the problems that you have with noise pollution. And let me just say, though, England's not all green and pleasant pastures. We have our own problems, too. We have cities, and we have lots of noise pollution. But I'm not here today to talk about outdoor noise pollution. I'm here today to talk about indoor acoustics. Hopefully that's a subject that you're aware of. If not, you will be by the end of this presentation. I want to start with this slide. This was a survey done in over 100, well, it involved over 100,000 people, and it was done in 50 different countries. And what they found is that noise is the #2 biggest issue, the biggest cause of dissatisfaction and loss of productivity in the office. So this is a real thing, guys. This is something we are concerned with. Now, there were 100,000 respondents. They haven't done many surveys in India, but what they did tell me is that for the whole database, 38% of people were dissatisfied across this database. But for India, it was 46%. So it seems to me that indoor acoustics is an issue for you people. And it's not just about dissatisfaction. Noise causes stress, absenteeism, affects everything we do, affects our well-being. And also what I found was really interesting is that in that study of 100,000 people, only half of the people in those offices thought the office allowed them to be productive. And to be frank, that's just not good enough. You know, we might think we're designing the best offices in the world, but if only half of our people think they're any good, that's not a good indictment for the design industry. So I want to focus on noise. What is noise? The simplest definition of noise is it's unwanted sound. And actually, what all the studies have shown, the research has shown, is that sound level itself only accounts for about 25% of the impact on noise dissatisfaction. So sound level is not the answer. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. The first one you probably all know, the dripping tap, yeah? So the dripping tap, a very small, quiet sound. But at night, isn't that disturbing? Isn't it annoying? So disturbing, we have to get up from our beds and turn the thing off. I'll give you another example. Any of you have been to the UK? We have a big concert, it's called Glastonbury. We've got our kids going down to Glastonbury. They are at the front of the stage. They're listening to the rock concert there. They're so close to the stage that when they go away, they can't hear. Their head feels numb. You may have experienced this. When you're exposed to a loud sound, you go away, you can't hear much when you come away. And that's because the bones in your ear have separated to try and protect you from this loud sound. So those kids love it, even though their physiology is saying, get away. And yet 2 miles down the road, Betty's in her garden having her gin and tonic, and she's complaining about the racket of this rock concert. So that's noise to her. It's euphony to them. So sound level only accounts for 25%. What I'm interested in is the other 75%, and that's about how sound is affected by our physiological and psychological responses, and it's called psychoacoustics. I've got the formal definition of psychoacoustics there, you can see it, but my definition is simple. It's how we perceive, interpret, and react to sound. Out here, there's air waves, pressure waves. When they reach my eardrum, I convert them into perceived sound. And then cognition kicks in. And this cognition means I interpret the sound in different ways. And I interpret it depending on context. And that's a bit I'm interested in, what happens inside our heads. So I've been on this journey. It's a research journey. It started with a literature review of over 200 papers. And then more recently, we've done a survey. It was only 500 people, it was worldwide, but we wanted to get our own data to test our hypotheses. And now we're developing a tool so that hopefully we can help people resolve the noise issue in their office by looking at it from a psychoacoustic perspective. The first thing we found is this. Only 18% of our sample thought that noise or sound did not affect their productivity. But even worse, 2/3 of our sample thought sound was having a negative effect on their productivity. And it averaged about -5%. And you might say, well, -5% productivity, that's not a lot. But if you're a businessman and you can get a 5% return on productivity, that is a lot. That will completely pay, in most cases, that will completely pay for your building costs. So it's not insignificant, this impact. We asked people what they did. How do you cope with all this noise? And you can see here, there's various things people do. Bear in mind, this sample was mostly European, but a lot of people chose to go home. So it seems really sad to me that we're creating wonderful offices, and what the people are choosing to do is not work in them. Go home so that I can actually do some focused, concentrated work. The one thing they didn't like doing is telling their colleagues to shut up, because we don't do that. We're too polite, aren't we? So we don't do that. So we found, both in the literature and our own survey, that there are 6 factors that affect your perception of noise and how it affects your productivity. And I just want to go through some of those today. The first one is personality. Now, in the 1930s, some psychologists, Allport and his colleagues, they found 14,000 different ways of describing our personality. And since then, psychology has been kind of trying to boil it down to some number that's more manageable. And I like Isaac because he came up with 2 scales. We actually got our respondents in the survey to fill out a personality profile, and I profiled them using the Big 5 personality inventory. But I'm just going to talk about introversion, extroversion today in particular. So you can see from this that extroverts, they're people. They tend to be more sociable, more outgoing. They're the people who like standing up on stage and talking. And they tend to talk off the top of their head as well. They're the risk takers, they're the thrill seekers. Any extroverts in the audience? Wave. Not that kind of audience. Okay. At the other end of the scale, and it is a scale, you may not be at either end, is the introverts. So the introverts are a little bit more considered. They like to think things through. They prefer their own company to the company of other people. They like doing kind of complex tasks and so on. So I want the extroverts to stand up on your chairs. No? Okay. So we have 2 different types of personality, and it's about 50-50 across the population. So I'm interested in how a noise affects these people. Got them to fill out the personality scales. We then got them to answer a lot of questions about noise and how it affects their productivity, how it affects their ability to work, perception, performance, stress, distraction, concentration, and so on. And we found, yes, both extroverts, introverts prefer quieter environments to extroverts. What the literature actually says is that the extroverts thrive on noise and stimulation, and the introverts suffer from noise and stimulation. And it's made even worse, because if you're trying to do a complex task, that is a stimulant which also affects the way you perceive noise. So you end up in this situation where, for the same building, the same office, we've got extroverts who require or prefer a noisy, buzzy, stimulated environment, particularly if they're doing simple tasks. And we have the introverts who need a calming, quiet, stable environment. And it's quite often overlooked. And you know these people. You know these people in your office, because the extroverts are the ones that are always talking out off the top of their head, and the introverts are the ones that send you a 20-page email about why you should and shouldn't do certain things. So it's really, you will know those people in your office. The other thing we found, which I thought was quite interesting, is that both our introverts and our more neurotic people spend a lot more time in the office. And when they're in the office, because they're attracted to certain types of work, when they're in the office, they tend to focus and concentrate and want to get things done. These are the analysts. These are the people who do details. In contrast, our extroverts are hardly ever in the office. They're out and about. They're talking to people. They're socializing. And when they're in the office, they're in meetings all the time. So again, we're in this situation, particularly in Europe. In Europe, we're creating these vibrant, colorful, stimulating environments that ideally will affect both collaboration and teamwork and brainstorming. We're creating these environments, and yet we know from our data that the people who will benefit from that environment tend not to be in the building. So again, complete waste of resource. We also asked people about things like, did they believe their environment had personal control? And what we found is people who believe their environment offers them more control over noise suffer less from noise distraction and noise disturbance, and their performance is affected less. So it's really important to give people an element of control over noise, and that's obviously really difficult to do in the open plan office, but it can be done, believe you me. There are tricks where we can do it. And also, we asked people about how they felt the acoustic design affected noise. And again, if we get the acoustics properly done, we can reduce distraction from noise. I'm going to skip that one. We also found this, and this is a little bit contentious, but we actually found that the people who thought they had more control over their office, over their environment, were the people who worked mostly from home, and then private offices offered a little bit of control, and then the open plan the least. So I'm not saying we should send people home. I'm not saying that we should just put people in boxes in offices. But what I'm saying is I think we can learn from why do they perceive they've got more control, and why do they think they're better designed, and how can we repeat that in the office. And also, when it came to distraction and concentration, again, the people at home felt like they could work and focus and work without distraction a lot better than the people in offices. And again, what that means is give people choice. Let them occasionally work from home if they can for certain tasks. So I mentioned right at the start that we have sound level itself only accounts for about 25% of the impact on noise. And I'm trying to work out what that other 75% is, whether it's psychological, physiological. So we did some clever statistics, we did some factor analysis, and based on that, we started to understand what are the main variables that affect our perception of noise. And you can see some of the variables here. So a big one that came into a lot of the equations was the ability to screen noise. So some of us have a natural ability to ignore the surrounding noise. Other people, it's a learned ability, and other people just don't get it, just never learn it. So that is a key thing. Another factor was the design, that acoustic design. So what we did is we asked people to mark the different acoustic design features in their office, and the more acoustic design features there were, the less affected they were by noise. Good thing for the designers. Homeworking, I've already mentioned homeworking. So the people who can occasionally work from home to do tasks without distraction, they found that that could reduce their how they were affected by noise. And so on. You can see the personality factors are starting to creep in. So we're starting to see that extroversion, neuroticism, and so on affect how we react to noise. And where I'm going with that is I think if we start to understand the makeup of people in our office environment, we can start to zone it. We can start to zone it by the type of tasks they do, whether they're on the phone all day, whether they're doing sales and so on, versus whether they're analysts and they need to do quiet work. And you need to overlay that with personality. So we start to plan the space according to personality and task. And control I've mentioned. And also, obviously, whether they do heads down work or not affects noise. So lots of factors here affecting noise. We're just starting to understand that it's not just sound level itself. So we came up with an acronym to help you design, or help us all better design acoustic environments. We call it DARE. So displace, you can read the reports on this, but displace basically means displace noisy activities. So if your workforce needs to concentrate, needs to get work done without distraction, create spaces where the people who need to be noisy and let off steam and do brainstorming and high-level interaction, give them spaces where they can go so that you're displacing the noise levels. We need to allow people to avoid noise. We need to give them the choice to avoid noise. So what we mean by that is that thing about, well, if they choose to go on work from home occasionally, that's fine. Wouldn't want them doing it every day, but occasionally it's fine. Give them spaces where they can go and hide in the office. This may seem a bit alien for me to say this, but rather than sitting them in seas of desks, give them spaces, quiet pods, telephone booths, little nooks and crannies where people can go and hide so they can focus and concentrate without distraction. We need to reduce the noise levels themselves. So wherever we have a source of noise, we need to look at how we can reduce that. We need to use acoustic treatments. We need to use ceiling tiles, wall panels to reduce or to absorb noise and to reduce the level, the transmission of sound, particularly talking across the space. So what can we do to reduce noise? And also we need to educate people. I'll say more about this in a minute. But the whole point of education is we all know how and how not to behave, and some of us are better at behaving in the open plan than others. You know, we all know that guy who stands in the corner on his mobile phone shouting at it when you're trying to get your work done. We know those people. We know the people who are on the teleconference call to America, and they're highly loud and they're just disturbing the rest of the office. So we try and work with people, with companies, to educate our team on how to behave, or at least be cognizant of how they're behaving in the open plan environment. So I'll try and, I'm not a designer, I'm a psychologist, so I'll try and give you some ideas. These are not all the ideas, these are just ones we can get through in the time available. So this is a plan of a hypothetical building, and there's a few things we can do here. The first one is, let's make sure our desks are sufficiently sized and spaced. In the UK, it's probably the same in India, but in the UK we seem to be obsessed with densification. We seem to be obsessed with making our desks smaller and putting people closer together. And what this is doing is increasing the noise problem. I'm working with companies now who are using 1200 mil desks. We used to use 2 meters, we've gone to 1800, 1600. 1200 mil, even one company I'm working with, 1 meter desks. And this is for people, professionals, doing work that requires focus and concentration. And to be honest, it's rubbish. You know, it does not work. You've got someone right next to you on the phone or chatting to you or whatever, but they're interfering with your work. If we create social spaces, informal meeting areas, breakout spaces, which I thoroughly support, by the way, it's important that we get to know our colleagues, get to trust them so we can work with them. But if we do that, partition it off in some way. It doesn't have to be in a room, it doesn't have to have glass walls, but use some form of partitioning to give those people some acoustic and visual privacy. Oh, that's interesting, just dropped 5 minutes. Okay, if we have informal meeting areas, maybe use high-back informal meeting areas so we, again, offer some privacy. It's difficult to see what these things are on plan, but they're kind of round pods where people can go to work, to do focus work, or to do teleconferences and so on, again, without distracting our colleagues. We can create little separate areas, little zones for people who do want to do quiet work, little zones for people who have particular personality types where they don't want to be exposed to the general hub and bub and buzziness of the office space. And if you're going to put printers in the open plan environment, do use some form of partitioning. Okay, I've got another 10 minutes. Aren't you lucky people? Where did I get to? So, yeah, you know, so we can start to create quiet zones. You know, we don't have to put these people in rooms and in boxes. We can just say, that's our quiet zone over there. Don't take your mobile phone there, and so on. So I've got a few images. I'm just trying to make it come to life for you a little bit better. So this is that same office, just a few rendered images. There's a few things you can see here. No, don't have a laser. There's a few things you can see here. First of all, you can see this is a trendy office because it's got an exposed ceiling slab, and we architects love exposed ceiling slabs. It gives more height, but the problem with that is it creates a reflective ceiling. So what you can do is you can put rafts in or acoustic panels to help dampen some of that sound. You can also see here that on the desks, they've actually got desk screens between the desks. Again, there seems to be a trend at the moment for offices to be built with no screens between the desks, and that means that when you're talking, it's going straight to the person in front of you. So not only involve screens, but put them so they cover their mouths, and then at least their sound is being absorbed. We've also got, in this space, we love biophilia. I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with. Biophilia is the affinity to nature. So we like to put greenery into our buildings. And actually, plants are really good at absorbing sound. So if you can't afford glass partitions, use some bamboo, use some planting. Broadleaf plants are better, actually. Use lots of planting. It will just help cut down the noise transmission without making it a cellular or dingy open plan environment. People love plans. Or you can use books or bookshelves. So we're using bookshelves here to block off the printers. And the reason for that is, again, books are very good at absorbing sound. Not as good as some of the acoustic panels, but very, very good nonetheless. So there's lots of tricks you can use just to stop that noise transmitting across the space. These are those funny little pods I mentioned. I'm not a fan of them. I think they look like goldfish bowls. I don't like being in them myself. But they've got doors, and what they're really good at, they've got acoustic panels. What they're really good at is allowing people to do teleconference or private and confidential calls without being overheard, or it allows people to go there and work there without distraction. So pods, they don't have to be glass goldfish bowls. They can be little corrals or little partition pods on the side of the walls and so on. In the background there, you can see we've used planting again just to partition off the informal meeting area, the breakout space, the social space. So I mentioned education was the last one in my DARE acronym. And I think this is the most difficult one, actually. I think we kind of know we understand acoustic treatments a lot better than we understand human behavior. That's the problem with psychophysics. But I think it starts by us all understanding what the expected behavior is in an open plan office. If you're trying to get your work done and people start chatting or shouting at each other, we need to let people know that's perfectly acceptable for them to say, please go away and do that in one of the noisiest spaces. So we work with companies for them to come up with their own acoustic etiquette. We don't impose it. We need to give people some form of perceived control over the noise in their office. And that, again, is difficult in the open plan in particular. But we can allow people to work in different work settings, including the home occasionally. We can allow them to work at different times of the day. So we can introduce activity-based working, flexible working, and so on. We can also talk to them about what the norm is, what's the acceptable noise levels we expect of them. So provide lots of work settings, quiet spaces, foam pods. It's not just about seas of desks with no partitions or screens. We can use do not disturb signals, and I deliberately put signals there rather than signs. I don't think that works. I think putting a sign up saying, keep quiet, that's a red flag to a bull, isn't it? We're just going to say, no, I'm not, thank you, I'm human, I'll do what I want. But we can use other signals. I've seen people using kind of traffic light systems, either virtually, so through Link and other kind of IMS type things. So do not disturb signals. You can use those. Please respect, I'm trying to get this report done. I do not need you disturbing. Or I'm green, please come and talk to me. I'm lonely and I would love to spend time with you. So we can use different types of signals. We can use visual design clues. And what I mean by that is we all know how to behave when we go in a library or a church or a mosque. We know that that space deserves some kind of reverence and quiet. And that's because the way we're brought up to, we anticipate that is the required behavior in that space. And you can do the same in the office. You can use little tricks to get people to behave in a slightly different way. That's why we like using books and things like that, because it makes people think of libraries. And then the final thing we're proposing is plan zones, as I mentioned earlier. So if we know we've got people who need noisy space and people who need quiet space, please don't put them together. Look at what their personality makeup is, and look also at their, the kind of tasks they're doing. So we've done the research. We started with the literature review, then we did the survey. Right now we're developing the tool. And the tool that we're developing has got several elements to it. The first is we do our physical measurements. We measure sound levels and we treat those. Then we look at the different work activities people are doing, because if we understand that, we understand the types of spaces they need. Then we look at their personality profiles. Like Google is a classic. Google actually is two different populations. When we see pictures of Google, we always see the slides and the fun bits, don't we? And that's because they have quite a lot of extroverted sales force, so they know they can design a space for that kind of people. But actually, they also have a lot of developers, a lot of the geeks in the background, and they kind of work in quiet, dark rooms. So they recognize we're different types of animal, and they design the spaces to make those animals thrive. So different personality profiles, that allows us to do some zoning. And then we also need to respect individual factors. We know from our research that age, for example, and screening ability affect the way we respond to noise. So we do lots of surveys, and then what that allows us to plan the space, zone the space. It allows us to make sure that when we introduce different work settings, they're acoustically sound, and so on. That's where we've got to so far. I say it's the start of a journey. I hope it means something to you people. I mean, it's a big issue, I think, across the world. Noise is the issue we're all ignoring, and as I said, it's probably having the biggest impact on our people in the office space. There's 2 reports. You can take, they're free to download. They're online, so take notes. You can have those. Either contact myself or Paige at Ecofon. The research was all funded by Saint-Gobain Ecofon. That's why I'm here today. And it's independent research, and we're hoping that we can just basically create better acoustic environments for everyone. Thank you. What? Oh, I'm allowed to take questions. I didn't know we did that. Who's got a question for me? Nothing about parking, though. I know nothing about parking. Oh, there's a prize for the best question. Come on now. Is that... Was it a free Ecofon sound panel or something?
Thank you for the lovely presentation. Just wanted to ask you, like you talked about the drop falling in the evening, in the night, so disturbing.
Yeah.
So what I understand from whatever little research that I have done on the websites is that you need to have a little constant sound so that it does not disturb you so much later.
Yeah.
Is that true?
It's a good point. So we talk about sound masking, and so what I do with that, my view on that, because there's different views on that, and the researchers will argue ad infinitum about it. My view is that the level of sound we preferred is a gentle background hum. If you think about it, we evolved to survive on the African savanna, and the level of sound that we like is equivalent to what you will find outside. So it's gentle bird song, the leaves rustling in the wind, gentle streams. But that low level of background noise is the kind of level we need to mimic inside the office. If it's dead quiet, if it's completely zero, which never happens, but if it is, we will think there's something wrong, because the only time it's quiet in nature is when something bad is about to happen. So we need a kind of gentle background hum. It doesn't have to be white noise or pink noise. It could be something a little bit more natural. In most environments, actually, just people chattering a little bit, a kind of low-level chatter, is fine. And the other problem is when it's completely quiet, then when the phone rings the other side of the room, or you know, you suddenly, what's that? So absolutely right. Thank you.
Have you done any research on, like you have in an office environment, a public address system which keeps giving you a little bit of sound that...
Well, that's the sound masking systems. I've not worked on that myself, but I say that there's a lot of research out there. And all I would comment is that a gentle background level of sound needs to either come... I would rather it was more natural than artificial. That's all I would say.
Thank you.
Hold on. We'll get the mic to you.
I find this subject is very sensitive, right? Because it's, I find the subject very sensitive. My question is, just before your presentation, we saw a presentation from the gentleman who showed us a project which was at an urban scale, right? Yeah. And that space was catering to, in an urban level, but at different levels. There were, like, you know, one-to-one discussions happening. There were concerts happening. Yeah. And there are processions happening, right? In such an environment, right, where do we draw a line that a one-to-one discussion is also happening, where the screen comes not physical, or maybe, you know, where a line is drawn, where it caters and it is flexible to cater both the requirements.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the design challenge,
Yes.
how you create that flexibility in an environment. So,
Because in the slide which you show the office environment, right, where you had the open ceiling
Yeah.
over there, there were rafts in the
Yeah.
ceiling, and there's a partition which was, people was on the other side were discussing,
yeah,
right?
yes,
Now, that's a very, the example there is very small, living to in a closed environment. But here, when we are talking of a design challenge at a bigger level,
yeah.
how do we cater to that?
So my field is indoor acoustics, yeah? And what we're trying to do right now is say that cellular spaces in totally enclosed or open plan, neither are right or wrong. It's about how we manage that space. We have to manage that space. What I don't agree with is seas of desks, high density desks. We need to include occasional partitioning and acoustic panels to help mitigate some of the sound. But I think the starting point, whether it's at the indoor level or at the kind of urban level, is understanding the requirements of those spaces. What are the spaces going to be used for? Who's going to use them? What are the rules of engagement in those spaces? And then educating people in how to use those spaces. So I say it's not my field, but I think there's some underlying principles that apply more generally.
Well, a design of offices, workspaces, have started from, has gone through, very large-scale changes from Taylorism to Fordism, to where there are very specific design environments, like a hive type of or a den type of environment,
Yeah.
right? So, do we have any kind of research which answers to all this? Because Taylorism, where the things happened at 9 to 5,
Yeah.
and still there are, we are in a phase where things have globalization, and there are 24 hours working offices, which cater to very, very different requirements. Same space, but different requirements at different hours.
Exactly. It's all about adaptability and agility. It's about using the spaces differently. It's about activity-based working, so it's about understanding what people do and creating different zones, different spaces to cater for them. If you can build in the adaptability, agility on top of that, then you're doing really well. But I think hopefully the point you're making is that what I believe is we have to understand what the space is going to be used for and design around the need, not impose a space and then hope the need fits.
And I would like to bring to notice, when I was doing my graduating thesis, I studied office spaces, and I came across two very interesting spaces in India. One, unfortunately, I think it has closed down. It was IT office, a software developing office in Kolkata, which had den-like of spaces within the office, which had very, modular cubicles. But in the center of the space was two mud walls, which was allowing people not only to sit down on the floor and work, but then if they want to snore to take a nap, they were allowed to do that.
Okay.
And there was one office, again catering to IT industry, software developing. It's in Chandigarh by name Pugmarks. I'd seen it in one of the magazines, design magazines in, here in India. I went to Chandigarh, I saw the office, and it was a Sunday where a team was slogging to meet the deadline because they had a submission next day.
Yeah.
And in another zone, there was a team who was watching a movie because they had just finished their work.
Yeah, right.
And very normal materials in the office used, and still the team were working very fantastically.
No, I think that's great. I mean, again, you're highlighting the understanding of how people work, and this is the kind of thing that a lot of the media tech companies are doing. They want their developers to live and breathe the company. Sometimes we have our best moments at different times of the day. I'm not a morning person, I'm an evening person. I come alive in the evening. Don't talk to me about work at breakfast, it doesn't work. So what they're doing, an organization like that, is they're recognizing that people have their most creative, most productive moments at different times of the day, and they're introducing the spaces to allow them to do that. And there's nothing wrong with a power nap, so long as you work after, Thank you.
Thank you so very much, sir. And the prize has already been given to the gentleman right there with the first question. Thank you for your question, and thank you so very much. But to formally thank you and to appreciate your presence, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Sameer Bobet from Saint-Gobain. Let's put our hands together as he steps on stage to present our Smart Green Certificate and more. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as he joins us on stage. Smart Green certificate for you and the Saint-Gobain book, The History of the Future. Do join us for a picture as we capture this moment. Thank you, gentlemen.